Do you have a podcast where you interview guests? Watch this video to learn podcast interview tips and automation hacks that your guests will love when they come onto your podcast. For the best leadership tips, entrepreneurship advice, and subconscious success strategies to help you stand out fearlessly, build your empire, and crown yourself, make sure you subscribe to this YouTube channel and be sure to hit the bell so that you are notified every Tuesday and Friday when a new video goes live. Hey there, I'm Kimberly Spencer, high performance coach and founder of crownyourself.com. And after 150 episodes of my own podcast, The Princess and the Bee, and going on as a guest on over 150 episodes of other people's podcasts, as well as learning and listening to my Communication Queen students who I teach how to go on and get booked on other people's podcasts and profit from those podcasts, I have learned a lot about what guests love and what guests really don't like when they come on to somebody else's podcast. And in this video, I have broken down the exact interview tips and automation hacks that your guests will love based on all of that guest experience so that you provide an epic experience and start building an amazing relationship with your guests on your podcast. Now, one of the biggest mistakes that I've seen podcasters make when they are having a guest-based interview show is that they think that the guest experience begins the moment that they are on camera or in the recording with the guest. The guest experience begins long before that when you invite or your guest applies to be on your show. Every step from the scheduling, the emails, the prep for your guest is the beginning of that guest experience on your podcast. Think of it like this. When you are about to go on a first date, your experience with the person that you're dating begins in the texting phase or the emailing phase or the online replying back and forth on the dating sites phase. It's not in the first date. It's before. So if you can set up your podcasting automation to court your podcasting guests and make an ultimate amazing experience for them even before they get on that first date, meaning the podcast recording with you, you set yourself up for an amazing interview because your guest will already be coming in knowing that they feel respected and understood and appreciated for their presence on your podcast. Because your guest is giving you the present of their presence of their time to be on your show. And because the guest experience begins long before the guest even gets into the recording room with you on the podcast, it starts with the scheduling. And now, here are my 5 podcast interview and automation tips that your guests will absolutely love. Step number 1, have an automated calendar link to book. Here's an example of what that looks like both as a guest coming onto your show and as a podcaster and how you can set yourself up for epic success. So, one of the biggest mistakes that I've seen with new podcasters is that they have the back and forth email. Hey there, will you please be on my podcast? I'm so excited to have you. Do these dates work for you? No, I'm not available at those dates and times, but I'm more than happy to try these times. Do these dates work for you? Nah, sorry, those times don't work for me. How about this time? What about this date? What about this date? Sorry, I'm in a different time zone, so now that I'm traveling, only this time works and this time doesn't work. Oh, you're in a different time zone? Okay, let's adjust that. How annoying is the back and forth scheduling? So, if you have a podcast, automate your scheduling. You can use a software like Calendly, which is what we use for The Princess and the Bee, or Acuity, or Schedule Once, or some other form of scheduling software. But this will save your guests the time, the energy, and your sanity as the podcast host from having that back and forth trying to figure out an appropriate time that works for 2 different people in 2 different time zones, because I've been on podcast recordings where I'm in the Gold Coast of Australia and we're scheduling with the UK and with Jordan and Lebanon and South Africa and the US and Canada and all these different time zones and all the different daylight savings time switches and all the different navigations of the back and forth, plus having a pretty full coaching schedule and being a mom. The back and forth is way too much. Keep it simple. Have a link that you send to your guests that you say, hey, book for a time that works for you. The beautiful part about this automation software, so for us, we use Calendly. When we use Calendly, it integrates with my existing schedule. So Calendly is not going to let someone book at a time that I already have a client or I have a play date with my son. It's not going to let someone book during those times because I've already blocked those times off in my schedule. So Calendly already knows for those times that I'm not available. So when the guest goes to schedule, it'll only show the times that are mutually available for both of us. Here's a little sneak behind the scenes peek as to how it works. All right. So here we are in Calendly. I'm going to log into my account right here. Once I'm in my account, you'll see each different type of event that we have. So I have my private coaching, I have some research calls, I have our high performance acceleration consult. So each one of these are different events which require different booking links. So I have a specific one for the podcast for people to book on the podcast. And so this is what it looks like from your perspective. So you'll see that you have, what event is this? You have the podcast interview. And what I love about Calendly is that it seamlessly integrates with Zoom. So if you're using Zoom to record your podcast, it makes it very easy to send an original link, meaning you're not sending your personal meeting link. Every single meeting, every single podcast interview that gets booked gets a different link. So you don't have people popping in and out of your personal account from time to time, which can be very embarrassing if you've given out your personal link too much. So we also have the description of what it is and the URL for the event. Here's what it looks like from your guest perspective. So your guest sees that they can book anytime within these times. These are the times that you're available, so these are the times that they can book. They can book it in their own time zone, or they can change their time zone if they know that they're going to be traveling during a certain time or possibly during your interview. The other thing is that they can book here. And so they could just click here and confirm, and then they would enter their name, email, and whatever other information that you want them to input to prepare you for your podcast interview. You can put in, as the host, you can specify what are the times that you want somebody to book. And that's really powerful because that way you can prevent from having recording every day and be way burnt out on podcasting. You can streamline your own schedule and make it fit you. Remember, they, as a guest, are coming into your kingdom as a podcaster. You can provide different invite questions, and you can do different workflows if you have the pro plan, and you can provide notifications. So this is where I have a streamlined automation process that I share deeply and reveal all the secrets inside of Communication Queens, our 8-week group coaching program on how to profit from guest podcasting. So this powerful thing right here, you get to send email confirmations, email cancellation emails, and email reminders and follow-ups. So notice all of these are on so that and text reminders as well if you have an upgraded Calendly account. This makes it super easy to remind your guest that they have an interview coming up. Sometimes people get busy and things get miscommunicated, especially if you're navigating different time zones and whatnot. So this really allows you and your guests to have that open communication so that you set the frame for what will be happening in your podcast. The other part that I love about Calendly is that you can have an email follow-up. So you can send a follow-up, an automated follow-up for whatever next steps. If you want your guests to follow you on social, or if you want, a review of your podcast, whatever it is, you can put that in the follow-up notes so that your guest keeps that relationship going. You can also redirect them after they book. So you can redirect them to a different page on your website that maybe gives a little rundown or a little history of you, or to
a survey or to something additional for them to do. And if you have a podcast where one of the strategies is you want to have your guests pay to play, in essence, you can collect payments if you have a pro account. So I love Calendly. I've used Calendly for the past 4 years, and it's been a game changer. And our podcasting system with Calendly has been praised by 6, 7, and 8-figure entrepreneurs on its efficiency, especially with those reminder emails. So make sure you set up your email automation and your Calendly automation to streamline the process for your guests to have a really amazing tone set for them when they go on to your show.
Number 2, in your automation emails, set the frame for what your guests can expect from coming onto your podcast. Now, for some automation scheduling, this will require a paid plan to have follow-up or pre-scheduling emails. But the beautiful part about this is that your guest will get reminder emails as to what they can expect by being on your show. In these pre-interview emails, you can set some boundaries for what they can expect on your interview. So maybe some common questions or some interview success tips like put your dog and your kids in the other room when you're getting interviewed, or turn on your video camera if you have a video podcast. Steps that will make your guest feel prepared when they go onto your podcast. I can say from a guest perspective that it really sucks when I'm planning on going to an audio-only podcast. And as a mom of 2 boys under 5, sometimes my hair and makeup is not all like this. And so showing up on a podcast and they say, hey, it's a video podcast. And I'm like, oh, okay. Let me just quickly pull back my hair and put on some lip gloss and whatnot. But it really, it throws me off my game as a guest to be able to show up and serve if I'm not feeling like I have the adequate amount of preparation from the podcaster letting me know the podcast is going to be also in video, so that I know at least to have my hair coiffed, brushed, and maybe to make sure and check if I have any spit up on my shirt. In these emails, you can also establish a little bit of your personality, so your guests have an idea of who they're interacting with, and so that they can know how to serve your audience best. You also can add in some do's and don'ts, like do send us your social media links, and don't be nervous. We're going to keep this a casual, amazing conversation. All easy things that allow you to set the frame for what your guests can expect when coming onto your podcast. Number 3, prepare for your interview. Now, some podcasters like to do a lot of preparation, like hours and hours and hours of prep. Other podcasters like to keep it a bit more casual and do some preparation. Whatever your range of preparation is, I encourage you to at least do some preparation so you can have a bit more of some depth questions to ask the podcaster. This will allow for a richer conversation with the podcaster. So if they have a book, you can read their book. At the very least, read through their website, read through their about page, know what they're about, know what they also sell, know what they offer, know what their genius zone is. And you can also ask your guests what they would like to talk about. As a pro tip, I do this in our interview setup. So when a podcaster is going to book their interview, they already have a question that's set up in there that asks them, what would you like to talk about or promote on the show? That way I can make the experience a very positive and beneficial one for the podcaster. And it also saves me time and work trying to figure out what we're really going to dive deep into. And as you prepare for your podcast interview with your guest, ask yourself, what is it that we can talk about that will solve one of my customers' pain problems? Every single customer that you have has a pain point. And ideally, as a business owner, you know those key few pain points of your ideal customer avatar. When you know those key pain points of your ideal customer, Approach your research as to what angle could you take from this interview? What solutions can you find for your ideal customer? And then what questions could you ask your guest in order to provoke the answers that will provide the best solutions for your ideal customer? Remember, you are bringing them onto your podcast as a guest. Let them serve your audience with what it is that they do. And if you can be specific, your audience will thank you so much for bringing on that guest for finding those solutions. Number 4, in the interview, set the frame and the intention for how the podcast interview is going to go with your guest. What I like to do with all of my epic podcast guests that I've been able to have on The Princess and the Bee is I always claim an intention. I set the frame for how the podcast is going to go. And what that means is I say something like this. Thank you so much for coming on The Princess and the Bee. I am so honored to have you here to serve my audience. I just want to set the frame for how this conversation is going to go. So I know I sent you some pre-scheduled questions in the interviews, but I don't want you to feel beholden to those questions. I prefer to keep my podcast very conversational. How this is going to go is we'll just get right into the depth and meat of your content and what you do to make you shine. And after our interview, I'm going to record a pre-intro with your professional bio and a few key points from our conversation that I think our audience should really pay attention to you. How does that sound for you? What this does for your guest is it lets your guest know the parameters in which they will be operating inside of your podcast. So a few key points that I let my guests know. I'm not going to introduce them with some fancy long introduction while they're on their precious hour with me. That's something that I'll do separately. A second thing that I do is I let the guests know that I prefer to keep the conversation casual, insightful, and inspiring. And so I let the guests know that I want to dive into the meat of really what we can talk about that will serve my audience best, so that we're not talking about a whole bunch of fluff or pre-scheduled questions, even though I do send them some pre-scheduled questions in advance to give them some comfort as to what I can talk about. The beautiful thing of having pre-scheduled questions is if, as an interviewer, you get stuck or there seems to be that sort of like lack of rapport or the conversation, like those bits in the conversation where sometimes the conversation just dies. That is when you are able to pick up with a series of questions that you already have prepared and use those questions to then guide you into that next space so that lag time doesn't last. The setup questions that you send your guests can be something that will support you if you get a little lost or if you feel like what you've been talking about with the guest kind of comes to its end and you're not quite sure what to ask next. By having a set of prepared questions, by having a set of prepared questions, you'll be able to just guide them into that next question instead of feeling lost and flummoxed, which will save you in the editing process later. And now for beautiful step number 5, let it go and listen. So you've set the frame and the context for your interview with your guest. You've prepared, you've got some questions just in case. And now all you need to do is just let it go and listen. Once your guest gets on, you've set the frame, and you begin to record, ask your question, and let your guest go from there. And then listen deeply. Listen to their emotions. Listen to the words that they're saying. Listen to how they're framing what it is that they're talking about, and then lean into asking deeper questions of why are they doing what they're doing? What about that strategy worked for them? How did they get to that next step? Asking why, what, and how questions to deeply listen and get a better understanding for yourself will also allow you to get a better understanding for your audience, to understand the strategies, stories, skill sets, and tips and tricks that'll really serve them. Why I say let it go is you gotta surrender, baby. Surrender and let the conversation be what it is. That's also why you have the set of prepared questions, so that just in case that one topic or one point of discussion kind of comes to an end, you have a set of prepared questions to then ask that next follow-up question to give you the confidence and the courage to lead the conversation. After all, the guest is coming into your queendom or your kingdom, and you are blessing them with the power of your audience. Allow them to serve your audience and let go and trust that exactly what is needed to be said and is needed to be heard by you and your audience will be what is received. And for the final pro tip, in order to improve, you must ask for feedback. So, like I said in the beginning of this video, I have done over 150 episodes with our podcast, The Princess and the Bee, and been on over 150 podcasts. After every single one, I always ask for feedback from my guests and from podcasters that I am blessed to be a guest on their show. Why? Because it allows me to improve and grow. One of our core values of Crown Yourself is grow or die. Yes, we are hardcore. So we are hardcore with a growth mindset. And so that is why after every podcast interview that I do on The Princess and the Bee, and after every interview that I am blessed to have on somebody else's podcast, I always ask, how could we improve? How could we improve our system to onboard people into guesting on our podcast? How could we improve the guest podcasting process? How could I improve as a guest on someone else's podcast? All of that I look for improvements so that I can grow. That is how each one of these practices that I shared with you today came to be. Now, if you love this episode and you're like, I want to learn more about how to use podcasting in my business, how to guest on other people's podcasts, and how to profit from podcasting, then definitely click down below to get your booty on the waitlist for Communication Queens. Communication Queens is my signature 8-week group coaching program where I walk you through step by step how to get you set up to show up to stand out fearlessly on podcasts so you can share your story, serve, sell, and start your own. That is what I will walk you through over the course of our 8 weeks together. So if you want to learn how to start profiting from guest podcasting and using podcasting as a key lead generation that also allows you to spend time in your genius zone, then definitely click down below and get on the waitlist for Communication Queens. And if you like this video, be sure to hit the like button, subscribe, and share it with your friends. As always, my fellow sovereigns, own your throne, mind your business, because your reign is now. Watch these videos next to learn more about becoming a communication queen when you can profit from podcasting. Watch these videos next to learn more about becoming a communication queen and profiting from podcasting. Podcast interview tips and automation that your guests will love. All right, let's dive into this.